Okay, I guess we'll get started. Just want to give you a little couple of housekeeping details about the session. Um, I'm keeping the chat open for any questions as Grace goes along in her presentation. And then the last 2 minutes, no, 10 minutes, we'll open up for the questions that we've collected. Um, and this is being recorded, and we're going to make the recording available on YouTube. We're putting all 5 days worth of videos up on YouTube, so people who couldn't attend today can still view it. People from our affiliates and oh, there's Nelda. And so with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Grace.
Okay, well, I'm going to share my slides, hopefully. Everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. All righty. Well, I'm glad you guys were here for actually it's World Mental Health Day today. So we can celebrate that and everyone being here for this is our last session of the Be the Bridge. This one is In Times of Crisis, an overview on suicide prevention. My name is Grace Grinnell. I am the Program Associate for Suicide Education and Support at NAMI, Connecticut. So just kind of an overview of what we're going to do. We're going to kind of talk about suicide risk, warning signs, importance of asking the question, protective factors, community resources, NAMI suicide prevention programs, and making a vital connection. And I hope you'll leave today with maybe a little more confidence and compassion and clarity about how to support somebody who might be struggling with suicidal ideation. So just, some of the risk factors that somebody might have. Now, just because somebody might have some of these risk factors, it doesn't mean they're necessarily ever going to think about suicide, but it's just a list to kind of consider that, they might have a little bit more likely a chance to have, suicidal thoughts if, they have mental health conditions, knowing somebody who's maybe died by suicides. The social isolation is huge, the hopelessness. A lot of times we think about suicide as either psychological pain and or psychological and physical pain. And then when you put that hopelessness together, a lot of times that can lead to suicidal ideation. Okay, so some of the warning signs to look for, people talking about how, they're burdened, they're no good, they're just, everybody would be better off without me, being isolated. We know connection is one of the #1 protective factors against suicide. If you just look at different moods and how they may, swing, somebody might be really depressed and you see that, and then all of a sudden their mood changes and it becomes very, up, where a lot of times people don't think of that maybe as a warning sign, but somebody might be thinking that they might want to die by suicide. So that's why their mood had shifted to the other. Sleep can be a huge thing, sleeping too, much or not sleeping at all. And talking and wanting thinking about wanting to die. And sometimes the warning signs can be very subtle, and I would never want anyone to feel guilty that they missed something, because sometimes it just isn't obvious. So why do you think we don't want to ask the question, are you thinking about suicide? I don't know, Pat, if people can just come off mute if they want to answer this, or if that's
Yeah, they can come off mute.
Okay. So why do you think we as a society are afraid to ask the question, are you thinking about suicide? Anyone?
Yeah, sometimes there's fear of like, oh my goodness, someone's thinking about suicide. Now I have to jump into and mode crisis, and you may not know what to do. And then also people feel, sad to say, some people might feel like they're liable. I asked and something happened, then I'm gonna be blamed. So yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah, those are great. Anybody have anything else?
Renee had her hand raised, I think. Oh, maybe she took it down.
No,
Okay.
that was me, Pat. That was
Okay.
Pat. I wanted to just thank you.
Sure. Well, I can show you some of the ones that we came up with. So, obviously, like you discussed, the fear, like you don't know, you don't want to overreact, you don't want to underact. What do we do? Kind of like you can get in a panic mode kind of thing. You can think judgment, are they just looking for attention?
Mm.
But if somebody is, having suicidal thoughts and, doing this for attention, maybe if we're asked the question, we might be able to figure out what need is not getting met. If it's just for attention kind of thing. I know I'm a mama for kids, and I am always wanting to jump into fix it mode. So sometimes we feel like, oh my gosh, we have to control the situation. We have to fix everything. So that's, where like the superhero, the guilt of like, well, what if it was my fault? Um, you know, concern, like it's not my place. If you just didn't happen to know the person that well, you could be thinking like, well, I don't want to ask them. Um, what if you ask them and they're not thinking about suicide and you don't want to insult them? But I always say, like, if somebody, if you ask somebody and they say no, and, they kind of look at you like, why are you asking me that question? You can just say, well, I noticed whatever you noticed and say, I just, I'm concerned and I just want you to know that if you ever needed, to talk to somebody, I'm here. I'm a safe person you can talk to, have this conversation with. And sometimes it's, that there's a myth out there, like if you put the idea in their head, if you, say anything about suicide, that's been completely debunked. It isn't. If you talk about suicide, you will not put that idea in someone's head. And then there's, kind of like a disbelief. Like if you, like if you take like the high school student, you're like, oh, he's the football captain of the football team and he's got straight A's. Why would he possibly think of suicide? I can't, imagine, anything going wrong in their life. But, a lot of times what you see on the outside, I always kind of look at it as like Facebook, everybody puts their great life, great vacation pictures and all of that on Facebook. But really, that's not how everybody's life is. So sometimes what you see outward is not really, the person can be really struggling, inward. So I think we're missing a lot of opportunities to, you know, to talk about suicide and make it be more acceptable in, conversation if we don't start asking the question. I remember sitting in a meeting probably about a year ago, and there was an ER doctor in there, and he was with a mom and a child, and the child had made an attempt, and the parent said to the child, why didn't you tell me you were struggling? And the child turned to the mom and said, you never asked me. So sometimes, when someone is struggling with suicide, we need somebody to ask us before we can feel brave enough to admit it too. Okay, so we have done a presentation for police officers, and a lot of times they weren't sure exactly how to even start the conversation. So I thought I would just include this slide anyway, because, it is hard to, start the question, but the building the rapport one, obviously, if you know the person, you don't have to introduce yourself. But if you happen to be, with somebody you don't know, introduce yourself. Just say, who you are. Kind of make a human connection, talking about, how brave it is for them to reach out. It's really hard to ask for help, especially when you're struggling. So, kind of these are some lines that you can use. And then validate. I can't tell you how much validation can make a difference. I mean, for anything in life. But especially if somebody is struggling with suicidal thoughts. So, saying something like, well, it makes sense you're feeling like, whatever the person has described kind of things. It can be overwhelming having these thoughts. But then we can start working to, if you let somebody listen, you listen to what they're going through, but then you can also say, well, I'm curious, what's worked for you in the past? So sometimes I always find when someone's in a crisis mode, they can't think of any of their coping skills they maybe had before. And if you can, kind of get them to be a little bit calmer and then start having that conversation, they might be remembering, like, oh, yeah, when I, do XYZ, that's really helped me. But in the moment, they may not think of it. So these are just some ways you can help talk about the conversation. So, some protective factors, can definitely help. So, you know, if someone has access to, you know, mental health care, connection is huge. So, you know, it doesn't have to necessarily be all the family, you know, friends, community kind of thing. Wherever they can find a connection is good. You know, helping them come up with some coping skills, you know, reasons for living, limiting access to lethal means. So I do know that Change the Script, they have lock boxes, and they also have these medicine pouches that you can put your like the old medication in it, and it like dissolves it or whatever, makes it so nobody could use them. I know you can get those. And I know the Connecticut Suicide Advisory Board and the Zero Suicide, they have a CALM program that you can enroll in, which is consulting access to lethal means trainings for anybody who is in the field. That so some of these protective factors, you know, helping somebody with their self-esteem and, you know, a sense of purpose in life. So we're going to talk about purpose some more. So, you know, how do you help somebody find purpose in life? You know, kind of like sometimes having a conversation. I was in conversation with somebody the other day, and they were saying that when they were, I think, in a partial hospitalization program or something like that, someone noticed that they like to read a lot, and they said, you know, you might be good at being a researcher, and it had never occurred to them that it was something that they like to do, but that could actually end up being in a job. And they said later in life, that's kind of how they ended up going. So sometimes just noticing or talking with somebody that you happen to know that might be a strength that they wouldn't even realize could be something that they could make a purpose with. Um, you know, just you know, helping them kind of think about what gives them joy, what gives them, you know, fulfillment. And, you know, also we need to sometimes think about how do we define a life worth wanting? You know, what is it that would make us want to live? So those are just some things to think about. Whoops, I lost my mouse. Oops. Um, so now we're going to talk about some community resources. So here's some numbers that you know, some of you may be familiar with, some of you may not. Obviously, 988 is a huge resource that we have. So I have some numbers. So in 2024, they had 186,905 crisis calls. 92% of those crisis calls were that they were able to do it with just over the phone, so they didn't have to call any other, you know, police involvement. So you know, only less than 1% of the Connecticut call required an active rescue from emergency responders. So nationwide, it's 2%. And in Connecticut, the calls are answered in 5 seconds or less, 96% of the time. And so they, you know, they have these great trainers. They've gone through like an 8-week training program, and it is really a great resource. You know, 211 and 988, you know, they get to the same place kind of thing, but 211 can also provide other assistance like housing, you know, food, you know, different kinds of resources that might help, you know, give someone something if they're struggling. If they don't have them, then they would more likely think about suicide because of some of the things that they were struggling with. The 988, you can also call, text, or chat. Crisis text line is another one, 741-741, and that could be, it doesn't have to necessarily be suicidal. If somebody is just struggling, you know, emotionally, you can call them. They have people 24/7. Then if you have to call 911, always ask for a CIT trained officer, because they have gone through a special 40-hour training on mental health and de-escalation. So they're better qualified to respond to the situation. They're not always a CIT trained officer in every town or on that shift, but it's always a great way to ask. And then, you know, NAMI has their helplines. And then I also included the Trevor line here, if Lifeline, if for the LGBTQ folks. Okay. Another great resource we have in Connecticut is it's our very first peer run respite. And so this house is in New Britain. It's a 4-bedroom house. Like they have like 2 kitchens, 2 living rooms, laundry, you get your private bedroom. You can stay up to 7 nights. And it's, open to anyone who may be struggling 18 or older. And it is, a peer support place. So it's also free of charge. And I think it's like 0.3 miles from a bus stop. So that, people don't have to worry about transportation. So that is a great resource that we do have in our state. Um, and also Demas has a list of different respite areas too. So if you go to like ctmentalhealthservices.com, you can see the list of different places also. Another great thing that we've have established is these urgent crisis centers for kids who are struggling with behavioral health issues. So they'd be for under 18. It's very traumatic and stressful going to the emergency departments and hospitals. A lot of times you can spend hours or days waiting to be seen, depending on how busy they are. So, and there's also other things going on in the hospitals that can make hospitals very chaotic. So these urgent behavioral health centers can be a great resource for families with a child who is struggling. I know the Village for Family and Children's one in Hartford, they're open Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. And then like Saturday and Sunday, 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. I don't have the hour for the other ones, but I'm assuming they're probably similar, but great resource, especially, to tell families if they don't know, because a lot of times people don't know about some of the great resources we have in Connecticut. Okay, so Dr. John Draper, he defines the suicide crisis response as the 3 C's. And that is, the first one is like connection. So connection is huge. So we need to try to get people connected to whoever, or even you could be making the connection. So if we can talk to somebody, and the main thing is when we're talking, we need to do a lot more listening. So many people who are struggling with suicidal thoughts just need somebody to listen to what's going on. So I know sometimes it can be hard to want to problem solve and everything, but just making that connection and listening, then you can do collaboration, working together to, identify different, solutions and stuff like that. If you need a safety plan, SAMHSA website has these printer ready forms, which you can just print yourself, or you can even order a notepad. And, on this safety plan, it says, write 3 warning signs that a crisis may be developing. Write 3 internal coping strategies that you can take your mind off your problems. Who are 3 people or places that provide distraction? Who can you ask for help? And then it has like, professionals and right. So just having the list, working with somebody to kind of develop this kind of list can make a huge difference because like I was said earlier, like when you're in a crisis mode, you can't always think about what are my coping skills? What am I doing? I mean, I had the other day, I ended up having a panic attack driving, and I had just gone and given a presentation where I had some coping skills in the bag sitting next to me, and I couldn't think to use any of them because my body felt so dysregulated. I just was in full on a panic. So I ended up calling my husband, and he spent 50 minutes on the phone and got me home because he also didn't want to probably pick me up where I was because I was really far away. Um, but it just struck me as so funny that I'm thinking, I have just talked about all these coping skills, and yet when I ended up being there, I couldn't think to use any. So sometimes having a list and something written down can make a huge difference in someone's life. And then, we want to also give them choice. So a lot of times people are afraid to go to the hospital or afraid to admit things because they're afraid that all their choices are going to be taken away from them. So, and just because somebody is struggling with suicidal thoughts doesn't necessarily always mean they need to be hospitalized. Some people do, and the hospital is, a great place when you need to be there, but not every suicidal thoughts and crisis need to go there. So if we can work with the person, and help them make a choice of like, how can we handle, the situation you are, can make a huge difference. And some of them, maybe just not that you have to solve everyone's problems, but maybe just giving them a little guidance or hope to when you figure out what some of the issues may be and some of the barriers, then helping giving them some solutions or ways to get to a solution can make a huge difference. Okay, so another thing that we NAMI Connecticut now offers is a peer-run support group called Out of the Abyss, and this is a space where people can, who are struggling with suicidal thoughts, who are not in a crisis at the moment, but somebody, a lot of people have ongoing suicidal thoughts, but it's really a great safe place where, you know, there, since it's peer run, that people understand what people are going with. There's no judgment. There's really it's support with like no strings attached. These groups, are passionate. People share their experience, and then we try to teach or come up with some practical skills, that you can navigate your day-to-day struggles. Um, I had one participant come to the group I was running, and he said that he felt that something after the first meeting, he felt something kind of like shift, and he ended up talking, and I even saw him leaving in the parking lot with another person who had attended the group, and they, continued to talk, and he said, it really just having that support and knowing other people really helped him, because later that like a week later he ended up getting in a car accident, and he was physically fine, but I think his car was not fine, and he said that would have normally had him turn to suicidal thoughts, but instead he said the connection and having the support from that group kept him from going down that road. So sometimes just knowing that other people are there and can support you can make a huge difference. um, so some of the groups are, performed by trained facilitators who have their own lived experience. So the groups will, have discussions. We can have group activities, and really just kind of exploring different ways and, you know, that people can struggle. Like I had a group the other night, and anxiety was a huge barrier for a lot of them, and some of them, the sense of anxiety and that could sometimes lead to suicidal thoughts. So we talked about some coping skills, that what works when they're struggling with anxiety. So all sorts of topics, but the people feel um, comfortable being able to share these things because they know the other peoples in the group have the similar struggles. Okay, so the groups, we have in-person groups in Bridgeport, Darien, New Haven, Cheshire, West Hartford, and Willimantic. The one we have in Willimantic is we have a veteran who runs that, and that one is kind of specifically for veterans. And then we also offer every Thursday night at 7:30 a weekly online group. And then we also have another online group for young adults, and they use Dungeons and Dragons to kind of play, role playing to talk about suicide. Okay, and one of the other things we developed at NAMI Connecticut was a Why We Didn't Tell You presentation. So learning from lived experience of people with suicidal thoughts. And we have done this presentation over 50 times. And it really, what we try to do is kind of let people know that people who are struggling and why they may not feel comfortable and why they haven't, talked about their suicidal thoughts. And then to kind of come up with ways to help somebody feel more comfortable doing that. And also we teach some skills. So one of the one we love to do is the butterfly hug. This one was where you would just take your hands and cross your thumbs, put it on your chest, and gently tap while you're doing breathing. So this is kind of a sort of like an EMDR-ish kind of skill. But the great thing about this one is that if somebody's struggling and they're dysregulated and you're teaching them that, it can help regulate your body and also the other person while you're doing it as you're modeling it. So just taking the deep breaths can slow the nervous system down. Another great resource we talk about is the mammalian dive reflex. And so that one's where scientists figured out that when whales and dolphins and, aquatic animals, uh, have to dive underwater for a long time, and I like to say it's to kind of override their freak out of being submerged for so long. The cold water, when it hits the mammal's face, sends a signal to the vagus nerve, and it slows their heart rate down, and it kind of keeps them calmer. So they figured the same thing can happen for humans. So I'm not saying you need to have somebody dive in a ocean or cold water. I'm trying to see if I can find, I forgot to have it handy. But you can take these disposable ice packs, and they just crack them and they get cold, and you can have somebody put it on their face, behind their neck, even on their wrists or something. If you don't have an ice pack ready, even if you got a cold paper towel or something put on, behind their neck or on their face or something, that can help signal the vagus nerve, and it can help somebody's nervous system calm down and when it's dysregulated. Because when you're so distraught or so dysregulated, nothing that anyone says is going to sink in until your body has calmed down a little bit. You don't have to get all the way down to your baseline, but even if you can just calm somebody's nervous system down a little bit, then you can start, talking about what's going on and stuff like that. But when somebody's up here, they're too dysregulated to have things work. So these are some tools that we teach in the Why We Didn't Tell You program, and I thought I would share them here with you. So another thing we do with that program is we also ask, so I will tell the story behind the elephant. So we were speaking out at the Crisis International Team conference in Indianapolis about a year and a half ago. And I noticed that there was a zoo right by the hotel, and I happen to love animals and zoos. So I was like, oh, let me see what they have there. And I saw that they had elephant bathing. So I thought, that is so cool, because we always talk about the suicide being the elephant in the room. Wouldn't it be really funny if we went and bathed an elephant? So I asked Val if she would like to go elephant bathing. She's like, yes, I would love to do that. I asked Steve, the other presenter, and he looked at me and said, I'll watch. And literally he watched. He was not did not want anything to do with bathing this elephant. It's actually harder than you would think. This zoo is really onto something, because we paid extra to bathe this elephant, but we did all the hard work. And you get literally scrub brushes, and you have to scrub the elephant really super hard, because if you don't do it hard, it feels like a tickle to them. And obviously we don't want to tickle the elephant. So we kind of joked around and said, well, we made a vital connection with this elephant. So I thought today, a lot of times we want to have a discussion on, has anybody, had to talk to somebody who was struggling with suicidal thoughts, and would, care to share how that would go, or any questions they have about, talking with somebody. And if you did, you can just come off mute.
Well, for me, it was a sibling. And it was very interesting because we were the last to know, even though we lived in the same house. So thank God for Facebook, because the sibling was this is years ago, thank God, but the sibling was self-isolating in their room and had posted something online, which family friend saw in a completely different country, who then called us, who were living in the same house in another part of the house, and told us. And thankfully, my sibling and our family, we have a very close-knit relationship. So it was more of a shock for us, because we're like, how are we here, and had no idea. But gratitude that we have such a large network of family and loved ones. And then it was pretty easy talking to my sibling, and they opened up about how they were feeling, but kind of revealed that this is not something they can share with the family, because we're all about our day-to-day duties, and nobody checks in about how are you feeling, but everybody online knows. So
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. That is the story that's so neat, that when you think about somebody in another country saw it and let you know, that, that is really powerful and amazing. But it also kind of shows that, like, where we have trouble having the conversation, and it's not something we even think to ask all the time within even our own families. So, like you said, it's not like you're checking in on how's everybody's mental health going. And um, it's hard, I like, where's the balance of, like, how often do you want to ask? Because then if you ask too much, then somebody might think you're annoying
Yeah.
them,
Yeah.
So I totally get that. That's a really hard line, and especially if you're not seeing any reason or any signs, you know, also with, especially with kids and teenagers, like, is it typical teenage behavior that they're doing, or is it something else I need to worry about? Because teenagers, don't always want to be engaged in the family and can spend a lot of time in their room. um so sometimes it's really hard to know that. And sometimes if you even confront or try to talk to a teenager, especially if you're like a parent of them, they may not want to tell a parent because you're the annoying parent. Um, Even though you're just the concerned parent, but they may be like, I don't want to talk to you. So sometimes when I do like school presentations, I talk to them saying, like, find your safe person to talk to. And it might not be your mom or dad. It might be an aunt or uncle. It might be, a teacher, or, you know, the school librarian or something that you've made a connection with. I think the key thing is that we need people to have a connection and have a safe person they can talk to. And I think, some of my own things, I will think like I need to know who my go-to people are when I have, XYZ, to be prepared, because some people I would want to tell some things to, and some people I wouldn't want to tell things to. So, maybe suggesting when you're having the conversation, say, I know you may not always feel comfortable talking to me about it, but maybe is there someone else that could be your go-to person? And then, you know, if you're in a crisis, that hopefully that go-to person would then reach out to, the family who needs to know, just like the Facebook thing happened there. So that's a great story. I love that. Thank you for sharing. Does anybody else have any um, stories they would like to share?
I've had um, I've had experience with calling 211 for someone, and have asked the question, are you thinking of suicide? And have gotten very honest answers. I've had the conversation, more than once with someone, um, as to yes, I am, and then following through with, do you have a plan? Um, and hearing yes, I do, and then trying to figure out where to go from there. So I do think it's valuable to check in with people and ask that question, because you may get an honest answer, and
Yeah.
be able to help from there.
Yeah, no, I think it is so important to be direct and ask that question. And then, like you said, the follow-up question is, do you have a plan? You know,
Mhm.
and when hear how that's answered, then that can help sort of guide you to maybe what the next steps might be. So, and
Mhm.
if you're unsure, 211-988 is a great resource, because, and you can even call for a person, like you said you did, so you could be like, I'm with somebody. If they don't want to pick up the phone and call, you can be and talk about through what's going on, and they can help try to assess. So I think that, to me at least, feels like there's a little bit of relief of that I'm not the sole person making this judgment, that they can kind of help me make the judgment on what to do with that call. So
Mm.
yeah. So I'm really glad you were able to call them, and it went well for you. Anybody else have any questions or share? I didn't realize, I guess I went through my presentation pretty quickly. But does anybody have any other stories or any questions or anything? Oh yes, Renee?
I have a question. What I am experiencing as far as crisis, kind of like it's illustrated with my story, is we were blessed because we have a very informed network of family friends. So, we're very open and humble people. And when that happened, it taught us that maybe we need to be a little bit more open and honest with ourselves in our home. But, so you see where your gaps are and where your strengths are. But long story short, the crisis we're experiencing is with parents of adult children, and the adult children are in crisis, and almost helping the parents who are also in crisis to get help for themselves, because so much of the emphasis is like, oh, my adult child needs to get help, they need to do this. But as the parents, whether they live with you or not, you need help too. But it's so hard to, and oftentimes they are in imminent danger because, something can happen and they end up being harmed. So it's that secondary crisis. I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
Well, NAMI does offer some, we have family support groups. We also have a family to family class that could help, kind of give some
Yes. Yeah, it's that bridge
educational.
though. It's the bridge. It's like the question, persuade, refer, because so many family members, they're not understanding the urgency of them getting, so you're telling them about family. Ah, no, no, no. So I don't know what your thoughts, if like, especially you talk about your husband talking to you, but like, what do the caregivers, those support, need to know so they understand that they have to take that step, just as much as their loved one.
Yeah, I mean, it is, I think it's hard, especially when you are overwhelmed with the crisis that's going on, and you'll a lot of times say, well, I don't have time for me, like I need to deal with the person in crisis. But that's where I feel like NAMI, especially like either the family support groups and or the family to family classes, have made a huge difference. Actually, I told the person who does my hair, I saw her the other day, and she had her daughter was struggling. I said, well, told her about the family to family classes, and she said it's made, I don't know how many weeks in. She's a couple weeks in, and she's like, it's made such a huge difference. Not only am I making connections with other families, so she's getting that support, but she's also getting the educational knowledge. And she said, I didn't always know how to talk to my daughter. I didn't always know how to, do X, Y. She has an adult daughter who's struggling. And so, this, for people, so it's hard to convince somebody that they
Yeah,
need
but
something.
but you obviously did. Like, what did you tell her? What was the magic words? Like, how did you pose it? Like, yeah,
um,
I'm big with, well, you need help too. Like, but that
right.
that isn't working. So
Yeah, I think, just kind of like, being as supportive as you can and saying like, validate. So remember I was talking about validation. I always think validation is huge. So validate what they're feeling, what they might be going through, and also can say, hey, I'm not walking in your shoes, so I don't know exactly, but to me it must be very overwhelming, very use the words that you might think of. And then you could try to guidance saying, even if you said, well, I found it really helpful to, take this class, or I found having, other families that who know what my, struggles are. It was really great to have a safe place that I could just talk about it, because I can't talk to my friends about some of the things that going on at my house because they won't understand. But I can go to this support group or this class, and wow, these people get it, So something like that might
Mm.
be a
yeah,
way
that
to,
sounds perfect. I like it. Yeah.
convince. It's hard though. And also, I always say, it's what do they say? When you're on the plane, you put your oxygen mask on first, then you put it on your child, who can't. I think we have to remind everybody to take, you're allowed to take some time for yourself. And even if it's just saying, you need to take, 5 minutes to just have a cup of tea by yourself or to, do something. So this could be something that you need to, because you're going to burn out. And if you don't put your oxygen mask on first, you may really end up struggling. So just the reminder of that, because I really think family members sometimes feel like that they don't deserve or they can't take the time for themselves. But it's a unfortunately with mental health conditions, a lot of times it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yes.
So if we don't give the person the tools, the family member, what they need to help them, so, do the long haul. I mean, people maybe not be in crisis all the time, but it may be, a continual thing. So this is just building them, kind of maybe talking about you have these resources and you may not need it right this minute, but you might need it down the road. Or,
Yeah.
or it's information you could also share if you know somebody else who's struggling, you know, trying those kind of
Yeah,
things.
that sounds good. I definitely will implement that because I like how it really focuses on helping them. Almost like the validation piece is important because I was not in the validation piece. I was like, in my mind, I was like, yep, how is your child gonna get help if you won't get, but I think more validating them and like you said, posing it as here you are supporting and because you're absolutely right. The family is the first to turn on you. You really do need people who understand and can support your what you're going through. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah, that was a really great question. Thank you.
I have a question for you, Grace.
Yep.
Excuse me. In your out of the abyss meetings, do
Mhm.
you find are there a lot of people who attend who have actually attempted a suicide,
Yeah,
or are they just they have the thoughts and they found us some way or another?
I think it's been a mix.
Okay.
I definitely know some people who have, and some of them are open to, talk a little bit about their attempt, or they may just say they had made an attempt in the past. And then I think we have some people who just have just dealt with having just the
Mm,
suicidal thoughts, but they haven't, made the attempt. So there is a little bit of a mix. I think I think both can support both, you know.
mhm.
So
Thank you.
yeah. Any other
I
questions?
do have a question because in
Mhm.
as you can see, I wear multiple roles, NAMI,
Yeah.
I'm City. I do peer support for parents with children with behavioral health needs. And then, of course, as a loved one and someone with their own lived experience. But is there a place to find data that can support? Because we talk about having that trusted person,
Hmm.
and that is a beautiful thing. But we know for some people that's not an option so much. Is there a way to find out if having a regular therapist helpful? Because I know if theoretically, if you have your trusted person, your therapist that you check in with like every week or every other week, then if you are feeling you should be comfortable enough to disclose, and I'm just assuming, because what I do with my families of children who are under 18 mostly is say, okay, your child may be prone to anxiety or the depression. There's not that there has not been a crisis about suicidality. Sometimes
Hmm.
there has, sometimes there hasn't, but we are seeing some warning signs, and the discussion is let's get them hooked up with a therapist from now that every week they can talk to someone, relieve some stress. But I'm not sure if that helps when it comes to being proactive.
I mean, I'm a firm believer on therapy. I actually have two therapists. Self-disclosure here. So I think it works for me. Um, so I mean, the one thing I think about therapy is that it's kind of like dating. You got to find the right person. And it's okay to try a few different ones because some of them might not be a good fit. So I think if somebody maybe is been against or had a negative experience or they didn't like the therapist or they couldn't connect with them, then they may think all therapy is, bad or whatever. So I do like to kind of say, hey, it's like, every date you go on isn't the guy you're going to necessarily want to marry. So, think of it as kind of like every therapist may not be the right therapist for you. So you might take a few to try. And I also get that it is hard to find a therapist, but there are definitely there a lot more nowadays, especially with the telehealth. So there are organizations like BetterHelp, and there's a one called Rula, stuff like that, where it's all online and you can get, somebody that way. So sometimes that might be an option if they don't want to even go to somebody. As for data on, they help. I haven't actually researched that to know. I just, from all my experience with people who have therapy, it has been a positive experience. And I know for most everybody who is, I think culinary group has at some point, if they're not currently seeing a therapist, has seen a therapist. So I think it's, if you are struggling, most people go to that. But it is about finding the right fit too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that's another thing to point
Yeah.
out.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And different people also focus on different things. So if you have, had a certain, like trauma or something like that, there's some therapists who are better with trauma, and they might do things like EMDR or accelerated resolution therapy and things like that. That might be, helpful. So that might be a certain kind. Others want to sometimes specialize in children or adult or, different populations of things. I was talking with my health psychologist just yesterday, and she's like, I've never dealt with somebody who has schizophrenia. She's like, I learned it in school, but that's not part of my practice. So if I had somebody with that, I wouldn't be the right therapist for that. We were just kind of
Mhm.
generally thinking about that. So I thought, it's a good point that you need to find, depending on what may be going on, finding the person whose skill set, because even just because they're a therapist doesn't mean they're necessarily skilled in that particular
Yes,
thing. A lot of times
that's
they go
true.
in certain things. So that's another way to weed somebody out as,
Yeah.
what you're.
That's a good point because we were at the public policy committee meeting last night for NAMI, and
Mhm,
we're talking about just the dichotomy between substance use
mhm.
counseling and mental health counseling. And a lot of people with co-occurring, sometimes they may be having a counselor having to do with their substance use, and not necessarily it's you're right. It definitely, you have to be aware of what kind of therapy you're getting and how, especially when it comes to suicidality,
Right.
um, how that can impact. Because I know, hearing people share about substance use disorder, sometimes the suicidality actually increases when they are weaning off of substances because it was a mask to begin with. So they have to talk to each other. Yeah.
Oh, completely. And that can, that could be the coping skill that they were
Yes.
using. So yes. And not all, especially with suicide, not all therapists are comfortable with it. So some of them may be like, oh, nope, you're too high risk. You mentioned the suicide word and whoops, you got to go to a partial hospitalization program, or you have to go to the hospital, or you're too much for, our organization, or what, therapy practice, something like that. So I think if you are somebody who is struggling, or you have a family member who has struggled with suicidal thoughts, that's a good question to ask when you're, you know, interviewing the therapist to see if it's a good fit. How do you handle suicide? What is your policy? Do you have a policy? Do you have a this? Are you comfortable with somebody coming in saying, I may be having suicidal thoughts, but not calling the ambulance right away? Because not, if they're overreacting, that's not a great situation either. A lot of times people struggle with chronic suicide, um, those thoughts where they may have them, they may have a plan, but they don't plan on acting on it. So they don't necessarily need to be in the hospital, but they need to be, seen by the therapist, and the therapist needs to be comfortable enough with having those conversations. I know I am blessed with, my therapist. I have worked out the whole deal on, like, when I'm struggling, how to talk to him, and and let them, actually both of mine would know. So, but that's because, having the relationship and that connection is really huge. But I think having the conversation beforehand, especially if you're looking for a new one, is a very good idea.
Thank you so much. This is very helpful. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Good. I'm glad it's helpful. Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts, comments? I think we have a few minutes. Well, I can get to my.
I have another question for you.
Okay.
Um, I'm not sure exactly when this started happening. I think it might have even been in COVID or maybe before. I'm not sure. When you go to the doctors and now they ask you the question, they always ask you the questions, right?
Mhm.
And one of them, and I think mostly the questions are slanted to help them figure out, if you are having issues with your own safety and if you're,
Mhm.
you know, have you read any research as to how effective that process is? Has it added anything?
Well,
Every time I get asked those questions, my mind comes right back to mental health issues in NAMI, but I just wondered if it's a useful tool.
so here's what the people I know in the lived experience thing, and also people in different meetings I have. So I don't actually have like hard data, but just the
Yeah.
collective data of what people have talked about is a lot of times people say, I know how to fill out that form if I want to get in the hospital or if I don't want to get in the hospital. So
Right.
they will not necessarily be honest on it. It's also, we talk about how that form is given. So if somebody just hands you that form in the waiting room or you're filling it out or it's like some paperwork that comes you fill out online, are you really going to be honest? But if you are struggling and somebody's asking you those questions, making that connection, a lot of times you'll, be more likely to be honest with it. The other thing we think about and has been discussed in different, venues that I've been at, either the Zero Suicide or the Canadian Suicide Advisory Board, is that what are the doctors doing with that information? So if somebody's just filling out that form, are they actually really looking at it? And do they actually know what the next step should be? So I think they're kind of to use a swear word, covering their ass by having these forms and not, I don't think they always know what to do. It's like checking a box.
Yeah.
We covered it. So do definitely think there needs to be way more education. And it's been talked about with medical providers on if you give these screenings, well, what are you going to do with them? How are you giving them? We like to talk about that is, if you're just giving somebody a form in the waiting room and all these people, you're probably not going to get honest answers. But how you can take that form and all those questions and ask it through a conversation and you will most likely get better answers. So, yeah.
That's a great way to end it. I love that. That's true. Conversations are everything. Instead
Yeah.
of just checking off a box like that can.
Exactly. I mean, because if somebody's just like, okay, 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 yeah, that's not connection. That's the most important things. Have a conversation. I mean, we are struggling as a society alone with our phones and our devices and having less conversations and connections to begin with. So when somebody's struggling with suicide, last thing you want to be doing is having them fill a form out on a tablet or something. They, make that connection, have that conversation. And I know, it's been talked about in meetings, stuff like that. I do not know where it's going. I do not know how like these big health organizations are, training, but I think it is starting to be on people's radar. So, but I don't know if changes have been made yet. But that was a good question, Pat.
Okay, so it's almost time for us to end. So, as I said, there you go. There's your thank you
There's
screen.
my contact information. If anybody has any other questions or anything else they would like to talk about, or wants to know more about, either Out of the Abyss or the Why We Didn't Tell You program, always happy to talk about that.
Okay.
And,
Thank you, Grace.
So,
It was a great
oh,
presentation.